President Trump said today that he wants governors to allow churches and centers of faith in their states to now reopen, even as state health officials are still telling people it's important to limit the number of people that you're around, saying that big groups are not a good idea.
Today, I'm identifying houses of worship, churches, synagogue, and mosques as essential places that provide essential services.
According to the president, the CDC is going to soon issue guidance for communities of faith to reopen safely. The president says if governors do not abide by his request, he will, quote, override them. However, it is unclear whether he has the legal authority to do that. So here in Georgia, churches were already allowed to reopen if they followed a long list of guidelines, including social distancing and limiting the numbers of people. Governor Kemp says he agrees with what the president said today.
So, I mean, people have the option in Georgia, but I think, I certainly applaud the president on that. I think people are ready to get back to that. They're ready to take the fight to the virus. And, we're a faithful nation, and I think that'll be very helpful.
And Cheryl, a lot of churches in Atlanta are considered mega churches with about a congregation anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 people. So you put that in perspective. If a live concert venue can't reopen right now, then it really makes you think about the amount of people coming back into that space.